our approach. And the work, when it comes to be rolled out, will be delivered very much in partnership with Wiltshire Council and local agencies, Blue Light Services, the police, fire and rescue, and so on. The Ministry of Defence are providing the specialist military teams who will actually do the main parts of the work. In some cases, they'll be supported by some other specialist or potentially some specialist contractors, but it will be the military teams who will do the bulk of the decontamination work. All of the waste that the process produces will be safely removed. It'll be taken away and incinerated to make sure that it's safely dealt with, and none of the sites will be released back into public use, as Ian said, until we are happy that the decontamination is complete. You'll already have seen over the last few weeks a significant police and expert presence during the course of the investigation, going in and out of the sites and working on them. And what the process of moving into decontamination means is that you will continue to see or see again those experts in the city for the few months during the period while we do the work. One of the first things that you will see, and that is starting tonight, is that barriers, sort of semi-permanent barriers, will be replacing the temporary cordons at a number of sites, and in particular the city centre sites at the Maltings, just over the way, at Zizi's and around the Mill pub. Perhaps as you go out tonight, you might see that starting to happen, or tomorrow morning if you're passing through the city. Elsewhere, at some of the other sites, what people locally will see is that as the teams come in and start to do some work, we will either be expanding or putting up temporary cordons for a short period of time, and that's really to make sure that the teams can come in and do what they need to do safely, and make sure that people don't stray in and out and endanger themselves. And all of that will happen over the coming weeks. I think one of the things I really want to emphasise, and Ian has said, is that the work will take time. We can't do all of the sites really quickly, all at the same time. And from our point of view, it's really important that we have planned that work carefully and meticulously, and that we carry it out in the same way. So the next slide gives you just a little bit more information about the basic process that the decontamination will take. I've already mentioned that we have, thanks to the police investigation that's been going on, a fair amount of information about a number of the sites, and we've got a good scientific understanding about how the agent works, and for some of the sites we've got a really good insight into how much contamination might be there, and therefore how we need to go about dealing with that. And after each site has been cleaned up, as Ian has said, we will carry out some testing, some sampling by those expert teams, and only once the results of those tests, and if necessarily further cleaning and retesting, only after that has come back and we're thoroughly reassured that the sites are safe, will they be released back into use. Because I think we can't stress often enough that our number one priority is making sure that the people of Salisbury have confidence that the city is clean and that you can go back to using those places with full confidence. Moving on to the next slide, that really just gives you the site of all of the places that we need to do work on. As you can see, there are 9 of them on the list. We also, for a certain period of time, had the cemetery on London Road cordoned off. Anybody who's been past there in the last couple of days will have seen that that was released. The police tapes and the police looking after that site have gone since Tuesday, and that's because we have thoroughly investigated and thoroughly tested and found no contamination there. So we were able to release that back completely into public use. As you can see, the sites that we'll be working on fall into 3 basic categories. So a number of public service sites, quite a number of local businesses, and obviously those are the sites that we'll be cleaning up, but we're very, very conscious of the knock-on impacts on other businesses from the need to deal with those sites, and to residential homes as well. And we will, as I've said before, it would be great if we could just go in and do them all at once and very quickly, but we need to make some choices and determine the best order in which to do them. So we've done that based on a combination of the urgency and, to some extent, the relative scale of the challenge that we think we will face at the different sites. And so in general, as Ian has said, we have prioritised those places where public services need to be able to get back to normal so that they can support Salisbury in your daily lives, the ambulance station, the police station and so on. We're also putting a very high priority on the house of the police officer who became ill as a result of the investigation. And we anticipate that places like the restaurant and pub will then follow after that. One of the things that I'm sure those of you who live or work near any of the sites will be really keen to know is when things are going to happen, so that you've got the opportunity, you're forewarned and you're well briefed about that, and we're committing to making sure that you have that information. We will keep owners, residents, neighbours well informed about what's going to happen and when, so there are no surprises. The next site just says a little bit more about what you can expect to see by way of activity on the sites as we come to work on them. You will see, as I've said before, the expert teams coming in wearing their equipment. Some of you will have seen that before. When they go into the site, they will be working to a very carefully planned and rehearsed plan of action. At each site, that will be slightly different. It's based on what we know about the site and the different characteristics of the site. And as you can see, they will, nonetheless, all sort of follow some basic principles, which you can see on the slide there. The work will allow us progressively, as we work through the sites, to move to a position where we have a very high certainty that there's nothing left that could possibly endanger anybody's health or safety, and that you have confidence in that. And then just a further slide that tells you a little bit about the time frame. So we are starting work now. You may, if you were in the Maltings area yesterday, you might have seen some people in uniform coming in and doing a bit more reconnaissance. You will, as I've already said, see the barriers going up in some of the sites, and then over the weekend further work will be starting. It will take some months before all the sites are decontaminated and can be returned to public use. Immediately, we will be starting work on the public service sites, so the police station site, the ambulance stations at Amesbury and Salisbury, and then the Maltings Park. Those are the ones that you'll probably see activity on most immediately, and then the others will follow afterwards. And we will, as I've said, keep you updated about that. And now I'm handing over to Alistair.
Thank you, and good evening. If you weren't aware already, you have just seen that the Bourne site is one of those on the list for decontamination work. Now, in terms of Bourne Hill, we're talking about the new offices built off the back of the old building, which are home to Wiltshire Council Services and also Wiltshire Police, where it's a police station in Salisbury. This site will be closing to staff and the public from 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, so 4 o'clock on Friday is when we're actually clearing out all our staff. Now, both organisations have business continuity plans and we're putting that into effect, and we expect that this site will be closed for a period of up to 8 weeks to enable the cleaning that's just been talked about to be undertaken. The clean-up work is looking at 2 particular locations in the site and then a general clean of the building. The old building, and I'd emphasise this, the registry offices, is unaffected and will remain open throughout. We're relocating the police and council services around the city, but for the council services, our front desk for our services will be the old Bourne Hill site, the registrar office, which is the front of the building. I think most people know it with the large courtyard. Paul.
Thanks very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So as touched on, the 9 sites, most of which have been investigative sites to date, have predominantly now been handed back over to Wiltshire Council and colleagues to undertake the clean-up exercise. But you will still continue to see the policing footprint at those sites. Our role is to continue to guard those sites such that the clean-up activity can actually take place and critically ensure that they remain sterile sites so there's no risk to the public during that period of time. We've touched on the use of what we call the National Barrier Asset. That will be coming into the city over the next number of days and weeks. And again, the purpose of that is to actually try and make these sites even more sterile. It assists us in terms of trying to limit the amount of people that we actually need at each site. The security guards that will be working with us to make sure that we can share the task in a safe way of ensuring that those sites remain sterile for the period of time that's been discussed this evening. We're still at this point in time, over the period of 24 hours, we're deploying in the region of 80 police officers a day to make sure that we can keep those sites safe for you. Again, we've been assisted by over 20 different police forces who are providing staff. Again, you will have seen, probably worthwhile as you go about your business in the city, all the different cap badges of different police forces from around the country that have actually assisted us to date with that. And I was actually on patrol yesterday talking to a couple of them, and I was really taken by members of the public just actually coming up, chatting to them. It was a warm day. Whilst I was there, members of the public offering them water, cornettos, things such as that. And again, I'd just like to say thank you for the exceptional welcome that you've given them, which has been really well received by them as I've spoken to them. In terms of our business as usual, obviously it's still a significant policing operation, but with the support of the 20 other police forces, the impact on our daily business, we're able to manage our business as usual in addition to all of the demands of this particular incident. I'd just like to briefly touch on the Christy Miller site, if I may, obviously where Mr Skripal's home address is. This is still in the investigative site at this moment in time. I'm very aware that that has a significant impact upon the residents in Christy Miller. And again, would like to thank you for firstly your support to the officers during this period of time, but also for your forbearance as well. This has been, as we know, ongoing for a number of weeks now, and I can't give you a timeline in relation to that particular site when it will be handed over for the clean-up exercise, but it is likely to continue for a number of weeks. So thank you from us for your support and also your forbearance. Just touching on Bourne Hill then, finally, moving on from what Alistair has said. So as detailed, we will again move out of there at the same time as the council at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Obviously the clean-up work will take place. We've identified a number of sites where we'll operate our policing functions from during the period of time that the site is shut. So in terms of our community policing teams, which are the officers that deal with the 999 calls and also the 101 calls, they'll go to the Five Rivers site, so they're in close proximity to the city. And then our CID resources will go to a number of different sites nearby, places such as Alderbury and Wilton, and also potentially Amesbury. So we're still in close proximity to the city, and our view is actually the impact will be should be business as usual for us. It shouldn't have any impact in terms of the service that you will see from us. And importantly, in terms of our front counter service that normally operates from Bourne Hill, again, working with the council, we're going to relocate into the library, and we'll be using the library during that period of time whilst we're out of Bourne Hill. I'll step back to you, if I may.
Thank you. And I'm going to put my recovery coordinating group hat on just to give you sort of again the update on where we are with the recovery work. Some of you have heard this before, so forgive me, but the recovery coordinating group is made up of local and national agencies, and it's overseeing the work about bringing Salisbury back to normal. Okay, we've had £1 million of funding support announced from government already. That is predominantly going to local businesses and local tourism bodies, and that money came from the government's ministerial recovery group, which brings all the ministries of government together, and Ian and Sarah join that group to make sure we're getting full support and proper working between the national and local agencies on this. And the work to date, I think, in the relationships has been exemplary, and that's much to the benefit of the city. The money is largely going to business support, but also to tourism activity And I just want to give you a bit of an update on the hardship fund for businesses. Rate relief terms, we've already passed 51,000, well, over 51,000 out to businesses. We've also provided direct business support grants of around £40,000 to 27 businesses just to keep them in business during this time when the major impact is being felt in the city. And we have £75,000 of requests that we're processing at the moment. So a lot of that money is already going out, but for the medium term, obviously, we'll soon move to that marketing of the city further afield as we start moving further into the recovery process. We are looking at car parking. Obviously, the initial position was free car parking. To make that bold statement, we have had evidence and feedback from the business community around the lack of churn and the fact that possibly more workers are using it, which denies access to visitors and tourists. So we are looking at that in conjunction with our business community at the moment in terms of whether we need to flex those arrangements, but still, you know, keep the city open, keep free parking as part of that offer. This is our 4th update meeting, and we will continue to do this as we go through the recovery process, potentially with focuses on different aspects of recovery, so you can ensure that you're going to be informed. And it's a shame it's such a beautiful evening and we're all sitting in the dark tonight, but we'll carry on running these. I just want to finally touch on, before I pass back to Jane, you know, how you can keep yourself informed. Our website is very easy to find, wiltshire.gov.uk, and it's on the banner, but also if you put Salisbury in, it will come up. That's where we put all our information for visitors, residents, for businesses. We have had a pretty significant social media reach. That is an out-of-date figure behind me. That was early this week. This week we're now reaching 768,000 people at this time, and we're Thursday evening, if I remember properly. There is a digital portal for businesses to receive and share information, and that's the Growth Hub run by our partners in the Local Enterprise Partnership. And also the government's advice is available on the gov.uk page. And if you look, there's a long one there, but if you put in Salisbury, you will find it. I think is the best way to look at it. The community meeting we held last week, we're also live streaming, and last week 17,000, or more since last week, more than 17,000 people have viewed that. So again, we're ensuring that the messages go as wide as possible. Jane.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, I hope you found that useful. It's now over to you. Any questions, any comments, please? Yes, the lady in the front row.
When Mr. Skripal drove his car into Salisbury that Sunday, he parked it in Salisbury car park, and the car remained there for several days because nobody knew it was there, and then finally, as you know, it was taken away. And the site where his car was roped off for a very short time. It no longer is. It's not on your list to be decontaminated. I just went up there this evening. There's actually a car parked in the very spot where his car was parked. In fact, my shoes are probably contaminated now. But what are you doing about that car park?
So the list of sites that you've seen are the ones that, based on all the information we've got and the analysis and our knowledge of the agent, are the ones that we think there is a risk of contamination.
But his car sat there for 4 days, I believe.
Yes, and... Sorry?
Yeah, firstly, just to assist with that, it actually went on the evening of the incident itself, so just for the clarity point there, it didn't sit there for 4 days.
And I would just add that even if there was contamination in the car, that does not fall off the car onto the ground around the car. So I think you should be completely assured that that site is not within the area that needs to be decontaminated.
Good evening, my name's Sue Brandon, and behind the police station where you're going to decontaminate is a walled garden belonging to Wilts County Council, which I, with a bunch of volunteers, took over 18 to 20 months ago, and we've been looking after it ever since. Despite all the rain, it is the highest maintenance time of the year, and we have a greenhouse which is full of plants that we've been nurturing for 18 months now. I've watered it twice today in the heat that we've got. We're going to lose all those plants if we're not allowed to go in there. Is there any arrangement that we can come to as your decontamination sounds as though it's not going to be every minute of the day? Is there any chance? The police come in one entrance and walk away from the garden to the building. They don't walk up and round the garden where most of the work is required. Is there any arrangement that we can come to that we can water the plants, if not stay in the garden for days on end, which we like to do?
Can I answer that? Because I have talked to Alistair about this. I was aware from Attical that you had concerns. I think, first of all, I have to say that this is an international and a very serious incident, and we obviously need to keep people safe.
I appreciate that.
That's the first thing. But what we have agreed is that Alistair, I think, will meet you, and through Alistair and Sarah, I think, together, we're going to see if we can find a solution that will keep everybody safe, and your plants included. So if we can do that first thing in the morning, we will do that before Bourne Hill is closed down for a period of time.
Because it is not just a much-loved space, it's one of the few quiet spaces that the residents can go to when they're troubled. So
I think we all understand, you know,
sure.
and I walk through there regularly, and it is a beautiful garden. You've done a fantastic job in there, but we just have to make sure that everybody's safe.
All right, thank you.
So I hope you have a productive meeting tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wondered if somebody could explain to me. I thought that Novichok was supposed to degrade rapidly in water and moisture. In fact, the advice that was given to people that were coming to and fro to Zizi's until the Monday night was that they should wash their clothes and wipe their phones and purses over with baby wipes, in fact. Can you tell me why it's now deemed necessary to undertake a sort of an intensive cleansing with caustic chemicals when I thought it degraded in water? And in fact, the maltings has been exposed to weeks of rain. Why hasn't it washed away? Why does it need caustic chemicals to cleanse it when people were told that they could decontaminate their clothes by washing them and by wiping stuff over with baby wipes? Well, was that enough, in fact?
So that advice still stands. The chemical itself is diluted in water, so you can actually wash it away, and the dilution effect is very large and very rapid. However, there are areas in some of these locations where we have to take more care. And in addition, we need to be sure that when we're actually undertaking this activity, we are dealing with some of the uncertainties about where some of these chemicals might be. And that's why there's a requirement for actually a slightly more aggressive approach in some of those locations. But nevertheless, you can be absolutely assured that washing clothes is sufficient to take this chemical out, and it will be highly diluted as a result. So that advice still stands.
There's a gentleman on the end there, because I see the...
Okay, good evening. I think you can see from the amount of people here, when you take off the councillors and the ITM and people like that, that we've probably already had enough information, and maybe the fifth time should be the one when you tell us that it's all been decontaminated. And on the decontamination side, and I used to be in the Territorial Army and was an NBC instructor, I wonder why the Army didn't come in the first few days. Now, probably they've got even better kit now, but we used to have something called CAM, which is a chemical agent monitor, and NIAD. If the Army had gone through and the maltings, etc., surely they would have found if there's any nerve agent put there still. You mentioned that it wouldn't drop off the car, so it definitely didn't drop off the scurples, so why is the contamination there? We're talking about maybe 2 or 3 drops of Novichok, I believe. Secondly, okay, on the time scale it's taken to find anything out is gobsmacking. I know Nick Bailey, and I know that he's not, perhaps the Chief Constable will get me the right answer, isn't a uniformed officer. Therefore, the first people that saw the script holes would have been the uniformed officers that went up to them and thought they might be druggies or something. So you can take from that Nick, it's fairly obvious that Nick got the contamination at the house. So there really is no need, I wouldn't have thought, to be talking about huge areas of decontamination. Bourne Hill was saying it's going to be decontaminated, but people have been walking around for 2 months, allegedly, in a contaminated area. Not sure about that. We seem to have closed down most of Salisbury for a couple of drops, I'm assuming, perhaps they could tell me where it's more than that, of nerve agent. I think Putin must be killing himself laughing this tonight. If he drops a couple in every town in Britain, he will paralyze us. It's just huge overkill. That's my thoughts. Okay.
So, thank you. However, I think your experience of nerve agents or those types of chemicals is out of date. And I've got to be absolutely clear about that. This chemical is not detectable by any of the methods that you have had experience of, okay? I think, you know, in addition, you are underplaying the toxicity of this chemical as well, and you're also underplaying how the chemical has been spread. So go back to what I said about the ink example, and you dip your finger in ink, and if that ink doesn't dry, and you just go through your normal daily activities, you'll find ink in a lot of different places. And ink is okay because you can actually see it, but we're dealing with a chemical you cannot see and you cannot detect using the kind of methods that you are talking about. So when you actually put that into a sort of a system of trying to make sure that you decontaminate 100% from every site, you have to be very, very careful. It does not degrade as fast as you think it does. Okay.
It gets smaller and smaller.
But the chemical itself does not degrade quickly and quickly enough. Okay. So you can assume that it's not much different now from the day when it was distributed. Okay.
And so the MOD and the Army has got no way of telling of Novichok. We're absolutely at a loss with that.
No, we can detect it, but you cannot detect it in the field with the kind of instruments that you are talking about. You have to take a swab, you have to take it back to the laboratory, and we have very, very sensitive ways of detecting it. So we can detect it, absolutely, but it takes time and it's much more complicated than you are making out.
And again, many years ago, but we used to have DKP then, and we used to be able to swab an area. Could you not have swabbed an area day 3 and started looking into it?
I think the police were probably swabbing the area in day 3 and many other areas as well. Okay. Okay,
but so what day are we on to now?
We're, what, 5-6 weeks? Yeah. So I think...
And no further forward.
So I think the point I would make, first of all, there was a lot of work that went on during the investigation. There's a certain amount of testing that happens as part of a criminal investigation. Some of these sites were not part of the criminal investigation, but they were the subject of secondary or tertiary transfer. So we need to go in and investigate that. And even in the sites that were part of the investigation, the kind of testing and sampling that you would do there to find out the information you want for that is not necessarily the testing and sampling you need to be doing in order to be confident that there are not still small traces that people who habitually go through that area could be exposed to.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, obviously there have been criminal investigation scenes predominantly to date and has been touched on by Sarah. The purpose of those scenes at that point is actually to assist the investigation. It's only when the investigation actually finishes that we hand them back to DEFRA colleagues and the council such that they then can consider what is the cleaning exercise that needs to take place. The other element which is important, which you said in your questions, was in relation to the Bourne Hill site. So it's really clear to us that there's a specific area within Bourne Hill. So when the officers actually responded in good faith, they obviously, as part of that criminal investigation, took some exhibits back to the Bourne Hill site and put them into a property store. And it's that area just there which has been sealed off in the first 24 hours, which is the area where we believe there may be some contamination. It's not the whole site.
Lastly then, can you tell me how much nerve agent was actually on the door handle? We're talking a couple of drops, are we, or do we not know?
We cannot divulge that information.
So I'm just worried about the whether you have contained all the contamination. So, for example, did the Skripals pay by cash in the restaurant and the pub? And if so, where is that cash?
I don't know that detail about how they paid, but the restaurant has been sealed off for a very long time and things have just remained in the restaurant. So
it was open the next day, wasn't it? I think Zizzy's was open the next day after the event.
Yeah, again, I can assist with this. So key here, that this is complex and absolutely you've got your investigative head on there. This is exactly the sorts of stuff that we've had to piece together in relation to our response to this. And what we were doing in the first number of weeks around this was, firstly, there's an investigative requirement, but sitting alongside me was Tracy, looking at actually what's the public health risk. So we can't go into great detail, but exactly the sorts of things that you raised were exactly the sorts of things that we're talking about. And each one of those has systematically been considered such that we end up with the list of the 9 sites. We've gone through an elimination process to understand what the public health risk was in relation to any of the piece-by-piece activities of the Skripals on the day. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance in relation to the process that we've been through, understanding the science and the risk.
Okay, thank you.
Dave Butler, Managing Director of CBRN Solutions UK. And I'm sorry to pour cold water on this, but and having worked with real nerve agents in the past and looked for Novichok in the early 80s, I can understand why some of the questions are coming like this. I think it really boils down to, at the end of the day, although you can't tell us the quantities that were used, it's perfectly obvious that minuscule amounts were needed, both on the front door, the car door, for the Skripals, and elsewhere. So we're going to be looking for needles in haystacks to a certain extent here, and you already know where the hotspots are, and presumably Yulia will have been debriefed, and part of that you'll know exactly where she went, how they walked, what they did, and all the rest of it. And so I'm not surprised that some of the audience here are a little amazed at the size of the areas that are still masked off, and apparently, you know, we can't walk there, and you've got to take weeks and months to decontaminate it. It just doesn't make logic, and I know there isn't, but there is a logic to these agents. I'm still struggling a little bit to understand what I read about the fact that this particular agent isn't susceptible to the elements, won't degrade, won't evaporate. Well, I'm afraid in my experience, you know, it will, and it has. And so, again, I think you need to be a little more open in exactly where you're looking at. I mean, they walk to the Mill pub, and that walkway has been open for weeks. You know, you could have easily opened those shops along the park there and put your barriers halfway across, because it's probably obvious that there's no contamination along there, and let those businesses get back to normal. I think also as well, I wouldn't try and hide what you're doing from the media, because we learnt that lesson as an ex-military guy. We learnt that lesson years ago. If you try and hide what you're doing from the media, they will find ways, and if they can't find out, they'll make it up. Also, of course, nowadays they've got the drones, so you can put the barriers up all you want, but they'll still find ways to look at it. I would use it as a PR, as a positive one, show them what you're doing, put somebody out there who knows what they're talking about, and give them the evidence. So we demonstrate to the world, unlike the guy was saying over there, we're not actually showing the world at the moment that we're dealing with this in a very you know, professional way, dare I say, considering, as you have said, Ian, you know, you've got this massive amount of expertise lying behind you that is directing you.
I don't know whether you do want to make any comment on that. Can I just make a comment myself as leader of the council, and therefore we are involved in the recovery. For me, I just want the best scientists in the country working on this, on the globe. I want that to happen for this city, and I want them to take that as much time as they require to make sure that every piece of evidence that comes out of those sites is clear of any agent for the future. I think that is the most important thing, and I understand there's lots of experts in this, but we have a government that is working with us and for us in the city to make sure this city is safe when the decontamination has left and our friends in the army have gone away. And if that takes a little bit longer, then the main thing is that at the end we are safe. Ian, did you want to say anything?
Well, just very briefly, it's always good to get advice, so thank you. However, my experience is that the deeper you look into this, the more complicated it is, and all I can say is that the measures are no more and no less than is required for the circumstances, and I really can't say much more about than that. But I think that if you saw what I saw, it is quite appropriate what is happening at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Caroline Corbyn. Some of you may have seen me at the last meeting. Thank you very much for all coming and giving us another briefing. It is becoming, and I fully support public feeling, that there's too many conflicting decontamination.
This substance is not distributed evenly everywhere. There are real hotspots of it, and there's potential other contamination. And we're talking about the potential other contamination here, which is very low. It really is very low. And precautionary measures are things like using baby wipes and using and washing clothes and that sort of thing. And that's perfectly appropriate. What we have to do is to account for the potential hotspots. So that's why there's a difference. Okay?
I understand that, but actually, that gentleman, sorry. If we've got two other experts, whether they're retired or not, in the room, and they don't think it's satisfactory, how can you expect the normal members of the public to take your word for it when there is so many conflicting opinions?
I think just on the expert point, and I think this is probably a point that was made by somebody on the panel the other week, we're really fortunate on our doorstep. We have an establishment which is full of genuine experts on this substance, and a lot of them have been very, very closely working alongside and advising us over the last few weeks, and it is their advice that we are using, because you know, it is the most current, and they are the people who've been working with it. So in terms of the advice that we're using, it's the best in the country. It's potentially some of the best in the world. So in that sense, I think you should be reassured that we really are drawing on the best advice.
But some of our residents aren't convinced.
So that's hopefully why we're here today, to give our best advice and government's best advice. Gentleman in the front.
Well, mine's in three parts. Being a military man who has been through the Cold War, and I joined the army in the 70s. First of all, who are the military people who are coming? Because I heard 5 Live, they said there's going to be a few. Second part is, what safeguards are the people who are putting up the fences and the military people? And thirdly, I'd like to mention the Russians, but I've seen them. Thirdly, what are we going to do if it happens again? Because they're still out there. You know, and I've been through the Cold War. Okay? And there's a lot of military people around here, like me. Okay?
Salisbury is full of military people. We've got a combination of specialist personnel who are trained to deal with CBRN and CBRN situations from the military. Some of those are from the RAF. Others, so there's 20 Wing and Falcon Squadron, and they will be supported by a number of engineers and other logisticians.
I was a Royal Engineer, and I've carried naps. So I know about nerve agent, having been territorial regulars and reserves and the rest.
So those are the people who will be doing the work for us.
Okay.
Sorry, did you want to?
Sorry, my hearing is not very good, so.
So speak a bit louder.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are the people who will be doing the work for us. The point about the safeguards, was that about the barriers?
Yeah. The barriers have got to go up, and presumably they've got to be on, you know, and what safeguards are there for military people, you know?
Oh, so they will be properly suited up,
right, okay.
And will be observing their protocols when they cross the line into the potentially contaminated area.
So they'll be tested as well?
And they are having their bloods monitored, and it's part of their professional, normal professional process.
So my last question is, the B.S are still out there somewhere. And what happens if it happens again in 6 months or a year or whatever?
So the truth is there wasn't a manual for decontaminating Salisbury. This is an unprecedented situation for us. So various people have asked, why has it taken us so long? It's because we've had to work really carefully to make sure that we come up with plans and an answer that is appropriate for this situation. If it happens again, we'll have to do it again.
Well, I mean, I have subsidies with the police. Are the police actually actively looking for the cell? Because there may have been one person who put their stuff on the door, but there's bound to be a cell. I mean, I've faced the IRA, and I've faced the Soviets in the old days.
Well, I certainly have an overview of the investigation, but the counter-terrorism network in London... Yes, sorry, the counter-terrorism network in London are running the operation, but to give the assurance, I mean, this is a highly complex investigation. At this moment in time, obviously, we believe it's isolated. Again, extensive work is going on, reviewing all of the available evidence, and that will continue for a number of months. But the police service is absolutely committed to try and bring to justice these people that actually committed offences of attempted murder here on our doorstep in Salisbury. And just to give you an idea on the scale of the resources involved in that, there's over 200 officers and staff from the counter-terrorism network that are still working as hard as they were on day one to try and bring those people to justice.
Thank you. Atikul Haq, Ward Councillor. While I appreciate this thing takes time, and I'm sure you're going to do a good job, but can I request the Bourne Hill site is dealt with very quickly and efficiently, because it is a very important building for not only the community, the police, but importantly our CCTV monitoring room is there as well. So that would be my request, if you can focus on that. Thank you.
Atiku, can I say to you that they will all be acted upon in a timely manner and efficiently, and no more. But as I said before, I don't think we should ask anybody to rush anything. Safety for the future is the most important thing. Did you want to say anything more, Sarah?
I think the only point I was going to make is that, as Ian set out, you know, if we go in and we get our samples back and actually first time round we're confident that we have dealt with it, then that can be a relatively speedy process. It's to some extent the timetable depends on whether we then need to go back and do some more work. So there are best case and worst case scenarios, but you know, we don't want to promise you that we'll have done it in a couple of weeks and then actually find that we have to say sorry, we've got to go back and do it again.
When will we know the precise configuration of the barriers around the maltings? Is it going to be exactly where the tape is now, or is it going to be different? Is it going to change as the process goes along? Because it clearly has a bearing on which businesses are going to be worst affected at which time.
Sorry, just making sure I'm as up to date as possible. So effectively in the maltings we will be cordoning off the area that is currently cordoned off until we have done the work, at which point, I don't know, Alistair, if you want to say what the plans are then.
Certainly, because I think there'll be space at the back of Tesco's when the barriers go up initially, but for the area I know people are concerned around, the walkway between, as soon as the work has been done and we've gone through the process and it is handed back to the council as a clean site, we'll be looking to collapse the barrier back to open up that walkway. In terms of what happens with the area of ground, because you know we'll make a decision at that point in discussion with the sort of the City Council and others as to what we do with that, because we're progressing the development for the maltings, the plan to redevelop the malting site, and we'll just take that in the context of where we are. But the priority is to get that site clean and open up the route between the Market Walk and the Sainsbury's and the Central Car Park. So that will happen as soon as the site is clean.
Oh, hi. I was just wondering, we've had fantastic work done by different communities, the police, all working with the military to try and tackle the problem. Will we get the same level of expertise put in from different departments to help with the recovery of Salisbury and also the regeneration of Salisbury?
You mean government departments?
Business leaders, experts in their own fields, rather than relying on perhaps the council.
There's certainly a view from government across all departments that the recovery of Salisbury is an important issue. So Alistair and myself are talking to the Department of Business. We're talking to the Department for Culture, Media and Sport about tourism. So we will continue, and obviously the Department for Local Government, Communities and Local Government. We will continue that as we move forward into recovery and be encouraging them to give us as much support in financial terms as we can, but also in just support to move things forward and to be out there and talking up the city just the same as we locally will be talking up the city. So yes, that will continue even after the recovery. That's after the decontamination. I think it's difficult at the moment to do a lot of the gentleman here, I think, said, very difficult to go out to the world and say, come to Salisbury, because of all the activity that's happening. We will continue to do that in a soft way, but of course, once the contamination is finished and the city is clear of any cordons or barriers, that is the time that we move into a different level. And I think the important time is going to be as we move into all the tourism trade for next year. What we don't want is a tourism industry that is still saying that Salisbury is not fit to visit. So we've got to keep going on that as well, and I think that's what we'll do, along with the City Council and others the Salisbury, culture Wiltshire, you know, to make sure, as we said at the last meeting, as I think you were there, weren't you, is that we've got to have lots of things going on into the future, just to keep bringing people back and to understand that the city is a great city to visit. I mean, that's what we've got to do. Do you want to come in?
Only say my colleagues wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say that the council has a significant number of experts working on this itself, and they are engaged with partners around the table. And as part of the way the recovery processes work, you know, we have a system where when there's an incident, it's led by the police, and then when it's in recovery, the council takes over. So as we progress through this, we'll be working with all our colleagues and specialists from the council and for other agencies and the national government to make sure Salisbury gets the recovery it warrants.
Yeah, I think with respect, Salisbury is in a pretty bad way at the moment. Perhaps if more had been done prior to the attack in Salisbury, tourism wouldn't be at such a low, shops wouldn't be in the situations that they were in before this happened. They were only at break even to begin with, and this has really knocked everyone's confidence and belief.
We won't have a sort of knockabout, but Salisbury, in terms of the economy, has had one of the lowest rates of churn in terms of shop vacancies in the country for a number of years.
Talking about investing in our city, and some of the national business leaders that have been to our city, the message is absolutely clear from them that they want a city that they can invest in, and the city therefore has got to be cleaned to the very high standards that the panel have said. And that actually there's no choice about this, because if people are going to make multi-million-pound investments in the city going forward, then it's vital that the city is decontaminated properly. And it's only once that's done that for all of the city, public confidence will return. So I think that generally speaking, and I note the comments of the councillor and the former industrial chemist and the former serviceman who've spoken, but those views aren't actually in accord with public opinion, because most people want us to take a science-based approach to this, trust our military and our scientists and the DEFRA officials that are managing the process, and they're very, very keen that they get on and expedite and do that work to the standards and to the level that the science takes them. And I don't think at all that some of those questions are representative of public opinion. So I think most of us, thank you, I think most of us have got an awful lot of confidence in what you're doing, and we put the work of DEFRA alongside Public Health England with the fantastic work that the police have done. I think we're very grateful to you.
Karen Spark, a resident just over the road here, not far from Ground Zero. When this first happened, after a few weeks, we got told that there would be 160 military specialists coming in to test and clean the area. And then there was a big long lull, and eventually we got the impression that it's clean up by committee, which it is often to be. Thorough, it's a lot of agencies involved. All I ask is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the urgency of these committees?
It's not by committee, but would you like to explain who is going to do it, which is the military?
Certainly, it will be the military personnel who do the work of crossing the line, going in, doing the cleaning up. It's then colleagues at DSTL, at Porton Down, who will do the testing of the samples that they take. And then at the point where we get those back, that's where the crucial science group or committee comes in, and the reason it's a committee is because we want a number of people on it who've got the right expertise to be able to tell us absolutely it's safe or not. So I can see why it sounds complicated, but I think the important thing to take away from it is that we have got the people who really know what they're talking about and have got the expertise and the credibility to say yes, it's now safe.
Well, I understand that. I've been in the MOD and in committees, but the point is it's a long gap between when we were told we were going to get these 160 specialists to do the training, and then talking to policemen, they say, oh, it's going to take 2 more months. And we were told then, well, why is it going to take 2 more months? Because it's in the hands of DEFRA, we were told. So, I mean, it's a delay between the initial, we're going to get these specialists, and now is the reason what we can't understand. Why has it taken so long?
I think Sarah has explained that there's been an investigation in this last 6 weeks by the police, and now it's being handed over to DEFRA to decontaminate. And that's been the delay, the investigation, the police investigation.
So that has been the reason why we haven't got on with it before now. I have to say the investigation has also been one of the sources of the information that will enable us then to do the job.
Yes, and as we touched on earlier, in terms of the investigation, this is meticulous in relation to each of those scenes in terms of the forensic examination. Unfortunately, as you will have seen around the city, whereas normal crime scenes we can go in quite quickly due to the potential risks that are potentially there for our staff and all of the different agencies, it has been painstaking in relation to the management of those scenes, so we can only apologise for that. But again, the real purpose here and the aim is to actually catch the people that did this, and evidence and history will tell us that if we do the job right at the start, we've got the best chance of actually capturing somebody.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm a resident here, live probably about 150 yards away from the Skripal's house, not in Christy Miller, but 150 yards as the crow flies. A colleague from DEFRA, I think, said that there wasn't a manual for the clean-up of Salisbury, and I think used the word, you know, an unprecedented attack. But actually, there's been a sublethal attack that has now been going on for months and months and months. And I wondered how you considered that the response and the clean-up compared with, say, the Tokyo attack, which was a fatal attack on a large number of people, but they didn't seem to then take this months and months and months of nothing very much happening, and was clearly a much more widespread and deadly attack.
Well, a very different agent to begin with, and very different set of circumstances, which were, I mean, I don't know the absolute details of the Tokyo attack, but much more contained than in this particular circumstance. But the big difference is the agent that's involved. That agent in Tokyo was quite well known and was quite detectable. This one is a very different type of agent.
Yeah, I mean, I questioned slightly about how well contained it was, because obviously it was on multiple tube trains, so and a large number of people affected. So, I mean, the foreign, in terms of the amount of agent, the Foreign Secretary said that when he was talking about it, he said this Novichok agent was considerably more deadly than VX, and yet the 2 victims have survived, which would rather point out that if it is what you're talking about, it was an incredibly small amount of agent that's actually involved.
I'm afraid I cannot go into those sorts of details. We are just very, very pleased that the two victims are recovering. That's all I can say. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a question of proportion and whether the response sort of feels disproportionate.
There's a gentleman right on the corner there that's been, and then there's a lady.
Yeah, hello. I'd like to thank you all for being here, giving us all this information. Wasn't able to make the last one, but the Facebook Live was perfect. It's been reported from the government and the Foreign Office that Novichok has been being stockpiled in Russia and tested for 10 years. The emails of the Skripals were being hacked for many years. So why was this allowed to happen in the first place in our city? Why were the Skripals not better protected? And are there going to be protections in place for other assets up and down the country? Because I don't want this to happen in another city or town. It's bad enough here in Salisbury.
Yeah, obviously I can't go into specific details, you'd understand, but absolutely understand your question and where you're coming from in relation to that. So again, obviously conversations in relation to understanding exactly what happened in relation to this, both in relation to Mr. Skripal, his residence here in Salisbury, and understanding what all of the network looks like in relation to that is obviously part now of the investigation, so we can fully understand that. And again, that will help inform what the process is going forward in relation to other potential risks. That's as far as I can really go in this setting. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I feel that it's slightly disingenuous to suggest that that the contamination has been contained in the 9 sites, because there's been talk about hotspots, or one of the hottest spots of the lot must have been the table in Zizi's where they were sitting, and it's been subsequently destroyed, I understand. Well, between Sunday afternoon and Monday evening when it was shut, there must have been loads of people sitting at that table, you know, and somebody mentioned money, which has been one of my concerns. I mean, people put money on the table to count it out or to leave a tip. That would have gone in the till, maybe later on Sunday. That could have been distributed anywhere. Anyone could have been given it in change. I mean, you can't contain it. There will have been loads of people in and out of the mill, in and out of Zizi's before it was shut. I don't know how you can say that it's been contained, because it hasn't. You know, if people were given change that had been contaminated by being put on the Skripal's table in the 24 hours before it was closed down, it could be anywhere. It could have gone out of the till. It could be anywhere. I mean, how can you say it's been contained?
So the people who potentially had been through Zizi's or other premises, there's been a lot of, I don't know, Tracy might like to say a little bit about the work that has been done by Public Health England to make sure that either they report or are traced. So there has been a lot of careful work going on, both publicly and behind the scenes. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
For those of you that were at the last meeting, I did cover this in more detail, but just briefly, from the moment we started the response, which wasn't too long after the incident occurred, we did start doing that matrix of tracing. I'm not going to go into the details of the processes that we took. And then everybody that we identified then were followed up daily for 7 days to check on both their physical and their emotional health and well-being after that. So we have closely watched the people that we know would have been close to the sites at the time.
Hello, I'm a journalist. My name's Ellen Barry. I work for the New York Times. I have 2 questions. One is whether there's been any decision about whether the Skripal's house will be safely habitable in the future or whether it might be demolished. And the second is actually just following up on what you, Mr. Boyd, said, that the chemical is basically as strong and as dangerous now as it was the day that it was put on the door or wherever it was. I guess I'm curious whether it is true that the hotspots could be as lethal if someone touched them today as they were on the 4th of March, and how many hotspots of that kind there are.
So, sorry, Jane.
Yes, no.
Apologies. So in terms of the house, Mr. Skripal's house, that's still subject to the investigation. So at the point where it becomes free, then it's our job to render it safe. I think at this stage, all I can say is that we've got no plans to knock anything down.
And just on the chemical, this chemical can degrade in the environment, but under protected situations, it will degrade much, much more slowly. And we have to make an assumption that in certain circumstances, there will be relatively high concentrations, probably in very, very specific locations, which could be at levels that could be toxic to individuals. So that's an assumption. It's also one that we've tested in some cases, and we do know that there are hotspots like that around. So we have to make those assumptions that some of the hotspots we've still got to find. Okay. But those hotspots will all be in the locations we're talking about, right, you know. So it's just in these locations, there may well be higher concentrations that we still have to find, but we already know that there are some high concentrations within those locations. Okay.
My name is Derek Phoebe, and I'd like to ask if it's possible to establish any sort of timeline for the decontamination of the Maltings area, because I see it as very high priority to get those businesses up and running again, because the people who work there, many of whom are experiencing great anxiety at the moment, can get back to earning their living again.
So that is a point that I was here at the meeting last week. I'd heard it previously from a very large number of people, and that's why we put it relatively high up our list. You will start to see activity there in the next couple of weeks, and then the point at which we can actually release it back and the measures that Alistair was starting to talk about just really depend on what we get back from the testing we do. But as I say, it has been put high up our list.
In the interest of, say, the Maltings Park, I understand that because it's been cordoned off, that there's been an infestation of rats. Now, in the interest of local businesses, will you be able to deal with that during the clean-up?
I shall be in charge of rat clearance, so that has already been discussed. And obviously we need to take our turn in terms of the process. There is a sequence of events that needs to happen before that, but we are very, very aware that that is an increasing problem. But our team are on standby and will be ready to go as soon as we're allowed in. It's a top priority for us. Thanks very much. Thank you.
I've got two questions. First one, in meeting number 2, I believe it was, upstairs, you said that everyone in an SP postcode was going to be written to. Wondering what's happened to the letters. Has it got lost in the post?
So I think things overtook us, and then we had another public meeting rather than a letter, but we are working on the letter. But this is moving so fast that it's quite difficult. Once we've written the letter and got it out, we seem to have been overtaken. I do apologise. It was John Glenn and I that were going to write the letter, and we were just overtaken by events moving forward too fast. But we will come out to you when we've got as much information as possible. I think what we need to do is to write a letter, first of all, I think, to thank you, but also, once we start the decontamination, to make sure that everybody, not just the people that come to these meetings and look at it on social media, actually know what is happening and what they're likely to see. So we're working on that at the moment. Apologies.
And number 2 takes me back to timelines again. I know and I accept that you cannot say the Maltings will be back up and running in 3 weeks. Understand that, not a problem. But from a planning point of view, and it's something I asked at the last meeting, is there a minimum timescale I can start planning for?
I think probably the best thing to do, I believe there's a meeting arranged with the businesses for the Maltings next week, or there is a plan to do. I've certainly seen some proposals to do that, and we have said that we will come along to that and talk through the potential timescales so that businesses can have that kind of insight, and you can hopefully try and do some of that planning.
You seem to be looking.
Certainly, I think you have been met with by colleagues, and Tim's at the back, but we're planning now. We've got some more definitive we've met with the owners of the buildings, but actually meet with all the tenants of those buildings at Block next week. And Jane says, you know, what we're trying to do is, as soon as we know information, contact the right people. So last week we met with the owners just to explain to them what was happening. Now we want to meet with all the tenants and make sure they're fully aware of this timescale.
Sorry, I did receive a phone call. I've actually been off today, but the other shop of the same company in Salisbury did receive a phone call today, and I've actually contacted the guy from Russell, I think his name is, and apparently there's a lot of emails have been sent to my company's head office, but there hasn't been a response. So I'm wondering if it's going to the wrong place.
Well, I'm going to do what you shouldn't do at public meetings. See the chap at the back there with the white shirt with his hand in the air? That's Tim Martinson, our Director of Economic Development. He will come and do the email swap, so we've got a proper direct contact. No.
As a resident of Salisbury, I'd just like to say thank you to you all. You've got a terrible job. Nobody knows anything about this. It's never happened before. So if you are going to take 8 weeks, 8 months, or whatever, I am quite happy to walk around barriers and things like that, just to make sure that we are safe when you leave. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. There's nobody will either come out on either side. Yes, the city wants to get back to normal, but I personally think the city should get back to normal when it's safe to do so.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My feelings entirely, and thank you for saying that.
Anita Phoebe. We have one of the best hospital trusts in England, in Salisbury, small though it is, and some of you on the platform are aware that for 30 years that has been my view, and it's science-based on other people's opinions as well as mine. I haven't heard a mention from anyone on the platform this evening about reassuring patients. There are huge numbers of people who are frightened at the moment of going to hospital. Yes, Tracy, I know and you know how the chain of command works. You know how they work and the specialists and where they are, but the public at large in Salisbury does not. Please, Public Health England, make sure, and all of you experts, that people are reassured that they can safely go into hospital, because many of them are not at the moment.
Tracy.
Thanks, Mrs. Phoebe. I think it's a point well made. As you'll all be aware, our close working with the Salisbury District Hospital during the course of this incident has been very close. The involvement of the hospital has been significant and impressive by any measure globally, and we continue to send our thanks to them because their input has been absolutely incredible. The hospital is safe to attend. The hospital has sought and has received the best advice to be able to make sure that they maintain the excellent standards and to remain safe for the public throughout this incident. They have not needed to close and they have not closed. All departments have stayed operational throughout. The hospital remains in that state and will remain to do so throughout, and we continue to work with them. So if people have got anxieties about hospital, do get in touch with me directly and I'll happily give you that personal reassurance. It's certainly not something we're getting through in big waves. I'm not getting a sense of that patient anxiety at all, and we are working really closely with our patient engagement processes through the hospital. So I'm not getting that heightened anxiety, but if people are feeling it, then please do get in touch with me.
It's certainly not something that anybody's come to me about, and certainly they've come to me about a lot of things, but not that. But I have to say, can I reiterate what Tracy said? I think we're all really proud of that hospital. Very, very proud of that hospital. Thank you. It's not a big city hospital. It's a small city hospital, but it has done an amazing job, in my opinion, to be able to make sure that the 3 people affected are well, or will be well, hopefully, in the end. And I think that's all credit to that hospital and the staff in that hospital. Yes, lady with the navy jacket. There we are. Yes. Oh.
Yes. Hello. Yes. My name's Margaret Wilmot. I am very interested in the recovery plan, as I'm sure we all are. But I'm a bit concerned that so far there's been a focus on getting more cars back into Salisbury rather than maybe getting more people. And a couple of points to make in that respect. the Salisbury Transport Strategy refresh that's taking place is very much of the opinion that we have too much cheap and free and too many cars coming into Salisbury as it is, and that we want to focus on is getting people in by other means. And I wanted to know whether your recovery plan could be more in tune with that and try and give like free public transport as well as free park and ride, that sort of thing, rather than necessarily focusing on just free car parking. And the other point is, of course, related to health issues, because, as you know, Salisbury is an air quality management area, and more cars coming into Salisbury equals more congestion, more pollution, worse air quality, which is probably having more of a poor effect on people's health than any Russian nerve agents, to be honest. So I just wonder whether you could perhaps bear in mind you have committed to DEFRA to implement a transport strategy that will improve the air quality in Salisbury. So why are you taking steps which seem to be doing the reverse?
Thank you, Margaret. And why we did it is because the people of Salisbury and the economy of Salisbury needed somebody to stand up and help in a very difficult and unprecedented situation. Alistair said that we would be reconsidering, but we will do it with the evidence. And I think we need to balance the short-term economic effects on our businesses and our tourism against those effects that you mentioned, which are congestion and air quality. I think they're all important, but we just need to make sure, and we need to plan for the future that looks at things like congestion and air quality and public transport. And I think this is the opportunity to do that. But I would rather we didn't have businesses going out of business because people are not in the city at this particular time. So, you know, it is a balancing act. It's choices that have to be made. But I have to say, when I made the choice, and it was me that made the choice to say, stop car parking charges in Salisbury while we're going through this unprecedented situation, that came from the businesses. That is what the businesses asked Wiltshire Council to do. We've done it, but we will then keep, as I said in the first place, we'll keep working with the city, with the residents, with yourselves, with the businesses, and make sure that as we move forward, we've got the right solution for all those issues that you bring up. But the economy was, in the short term, was the important thing, I think. But I might have been wrong.
I just wanted to know, in the last meeting and this meeting, you haven't said what the condition of the 3 patients were up to date and what their ongoing health issues may be.
The patients are all continuing to improve. Obviously, we're not going to discuss individual patient conditions in a public meeting because we'd all expect that level of confidentiality if it was our own personal health. But I can assure you all patients continuing to improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Lady.
When the barriers go up, or the new barriers go up in the city, I presume they're going to be solid barriers rather than just steel barriers. And the only reason I ask is because instead of having black barriers like we have outside ZZ's, can we make them colourful? Can we put some welcoming pictures on them? Can we get, you know, paintings, or just so that every time we see the news, it looks very unwelcoming when they pan into ZZ's all the time, and you just see the black barriers. If we've got to have them up, we're a city of arts, can we just have some colourful, welcoming designs on them, or?
Here.
We're with you on that one. The barriers, when they go up, they will obviously be initially, you know, as you described them, so it's a black barrier or a surface. but we are designing messages to go on them, as well as directional messages, so shops this way, things like this, and things to go on the ground. But over time, we can certainly, and it's a lovely idea. So initially, it'd be about messages about the city, come and explore, visit, etc., etc. But over time, I'm sure working with Salisbury Creative and others, we can look for some other things. I mean, apologies. We also were joking about whether a Banksy would appear on one of them in due course as an attraction. So I put that message out there. Yes.
That would be good.
Two points. Just the first one on the anxiety of people going to the district hospital. I have to say, as somebody who's been up there a lot recently, it isn't evident from the car parking spaces that there's any shortage or any lack of people going. But it would be very simple to find out whether there's been an increase in the DNA. That's the did not arrive levels. So that would be a very easy measure. My point, however, that I was going to make was in relation to publicity and banging the drum for Salisbury. I'm a little perturbed to hear you speak about waiting and looking at next year's tourism, because we have this year's season about to hit us in full. I know that the hospitality industry is suffering around Salisbury. My own organisation, the Campaign for Real Ale, is working with the hospitality industry. We've organised a thing called a special city saunter, which is on Saturday the 28th, starting in front of the Guildhall at midday. And that's just to get people's attention onto the hospitality industry and say, it's here, it's up, it's running, it's a great place to come and visit. A lot of them will have a problem lasting till next year. We need to be keeping that going. And from organising this event, I would make a plea that there is a single point of coordination for every community activity, because every community activity in Salisbury can contribute with the businesses to banging the drum for Salisbury.
Last point, I think it has to be the City Council and ourselves, Wiltshire Council, that will be putting together the activities programme for the next couple of years as we move into recovery. I'm sorry if you got it wrong. I wasn't suggesting that we didn't do anything about advertising, promoting the city in the short term. But I do think when the barriers have gone, then we've really, really got to, to up our game. I think we are aware of the hospitality industry and the tourist industry at the moment, and we're doing everything we can to support them. But reality is that there are a number of companies that would come in regularly have said no, and we need to get them back. And we need to get them back and a lot more besides back. And that's the big push for next year. But no, we haven't given up, and we will keep going and do what we can. And I have to say that Visit Wiltshire has already spoken to a number of companies and persuaded them to come back that weren't going to come this year. So we just need to keep on and on and on. But I do think once these barriers go down and we can get out, we haven't got, with the greatest of respect, TV cameras actually showing cordon off areas, but as showing the beautiful city, the market square, the close, the cathedral again. That's the time, to really push on, I think. Did you want to say anything, Alistair?
I just think we are coordinating all the events and actually promoting them for this year. And there's a different piece of work that will be about promoting the city globally to ensure that next year we don't have any impact on the tourism industry there. And we're also, if you go to our website, you'll be able to see how to get in touch to make sure any events that are being planned are pushed into that marketing. And the other thing, we are working with the colleagues in the remediation cell about making sure that when we do have those big activities that will have a sort of national presence and we want people to look at, we won't be doing particular things on the decontamination, which will allow the media to focus onto those. So we're coordinating the activities to promote the city and bring people in with the work.
A lot of time at the hospital because I'm associated with the STARS Foundation, STARS charity, and I read in the Salisbury Journal today that there have been 2 Russian reporters apprehended in the walking around the corridors in the evening trying to find the scoopers, and I'd never seen any evidence of any police up at the hospital, or perhaps I didn't look in the right places. Thank you.
Certainly now just Mr. Skripal, who's there, remains safe in that location.
Yeah, thank you, Jane, and I agree with your comments about Salisbury Hospital. I sit on the food committee there along with Mr. and Mrs. Phoebe, and one thing I did ask was could we get some feedback on what the Skripals thought of the food in Salisbury Hospital. But no, on a more serious note, Deputy Chief Constable, about 2 years ago there was talks of you selling off Wilton Police Station. I bet you're glad now you didn't sell it off. And could I ask that apart from CID put in there, can you have some uniformed policemen out there? Because just recently we have had quite a few events in Wilton, sheds broken into, one bloke put in hospital, you know, so if you could put some uniformed people, and I'm sure Councillor Church sat at the back there would agree with me on that one, if we can see some more uniformed police in Wilton. But can I finish on a positive note, Jane? The Wiltshire Market Towns met at Malmesbury Tuesday, and we all agreed that the next Market Towns meeting will be held in Salisbury. I expect John Thompson's probably told you that. Okay, thank you.
Terence Parker again. I'd just like to point out that perhaps the testing of samples is going to be a critical activity in the speed of continuing this cleanup. Now, can I ask what any special arrangements have been made to have a mobile laboratory in Salisbury to test these samples, or what other means you're going to do to speed things up?
So I don't think we need a mobile laboratory. You've got a laboratory on your doorstep. It's so it will do the job.
What's being done to speed up the testing of samples?
So,
is anything being done to speed up the testing of samples?
So that is a really important thing that we are making sure happens. So as I say, you've got Porton Down on your doorstep. They are the experts. They are doing the sampling and the testing, and they're doing a really, really good job on it.
So just for the avoidance of doubt, unlike my 2 military retired colleagues, I kept up the motion of studying this particular science, and I'm in my 25th year now of doing that. And whilst this might be the first time this has happened in the UK, somebody referred earlier to the incidents in Japan. Specialists like myself, and I hate being referred to as an expert, because that infers you know everything there is, and we're all learning, and we're certainly learning about this one. But so people like myself have been going around the world doing this for a living. I've been to the subway in Japan, and by the way, there was only 12 people killed from inhaling the substance, and 5,000 were injured in the Russian crush to try and get out, just as a bit of historical data. So whilst this might be a novel event in the UK, some of us have been decontaminating these agents and other ones, biological ones and radiological ones, for some time. And that's where I suppose I get my frustration from in the fact that some of these areas are quite large, considering you did say, Ian, that you know where the hotspots are, and yes, there may be others that you don't know about, but the military already has a very good decontaminant in its arsenal, which has been tried and tested, and I recently sent my colleagues at DSTL Porton Down the latest information on the tests on that decontaminant against the nerve agents, and in particular some of the ones that you refer to. So they have all that data, and I asked them to pass it on to DEFRA. So I think you know, the public should be reassured that once they do start, you know, it will be done thoroughly, and we all understand it's got to be tested. I just think, for the sake of public sanity, can we keep the areas, and you've said yourself, apparently there's no off-gassing from it, so there's no vapour hazard, so therefore the areas to be contained could be quite small, and I understand that you might have to enlarge one area to get vehicles and stuff in, but you know, these should be movable barriers and you know, just sufficient to allow them to do their work, and I think everybody would be a lot more happy about that. And one piece of advice for the lady who's trying to look after the greenhouse, if she's been walking around the back of that area to and from that greenhouse for the last 6 weeks, watering the plants, then all she has to do is retrace her steps in the same manner she's been doing, and she'll probably be fine. And I don't mind going with her and leading her if there's any problem. You know, we had to do this in Sierra Leone with the Ebola. You know, trying to convince a Scouse plumber it was a good idea to go into the infected areas and look after the plumbing, crawling around the patients. The only way I could do that was to lead them in with it.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to leave it to the experts who I think who know all about whatever's happening and whatever it is, and I'm going to leave the experts, and I hope we all will in this city, to get on with their job and do it as well and as thoroughly as the lady said over there, so we are safe at the end of this process. I've got a young man at the front here who's just said he'd like to speak.
Hi there. My name's Louis Hodgkinson, and I've been a resident of Salisbury for 16 years of my life. I'm wondering if the County Council will assure Salisbury residents that there will be further investment, as well as the recovery fund, into Salisbury to ensure that we do rebuild our tourist industry and other vital sort of services in Salisbury, and also other important, you know, assets to Salisbury, such as the cathedral. Will we see more investment into Salisbury as well as the recovery fund?
We are continually having a conversation with government about that investment, and I always considered that the £1 million was just a start. I did mention that a start to government, that I felt it was only a start, so it is up to us to continue to pay. But I think it is public money, and we need to make sure that we've got the evidence about what that money should be spent on, and I think as we move forward into the recovery programme, we will find those things that need investing in. We're particularly interested in working with government on making sure, for example, that the Maltings development does not slow down because of this issue. Obviously, it's got to wait until the Maltings is clear and safe, but we want that development to move forward and not to be stopped or slowed down because of this. So that's one of the things that we're talking to government about at the moment, as is John Glenn, your MP. So.
Hi. Yeah, panel. Thank you very much, first of all, for coming out and keeping us filled in on what's going on tonight. On a slightly more light-hearted note, I have a question about the 2 rabbits that were taken from the Bishop's Mill pub to Porton Down. The owner says he's really grateful to have them back, but he says they seem to have taken up smoking, wearing lipstick and drinking quite heavily. I just wondered if you'd throw any light on that.
The rabbits are in fine fettle and enjoying their party.
Can I also add that somebody showed me a video this week of the river just outside the Maltings, in front of where it widens in front of the mill, and in that video was an otter. So, what make of that is what you like. So I would keep your eyes out. It certainly looked like an otter to me. And if I can get hold of the video, I shall be passing it around to the city to see it. But has anybody else seen an otter in the river?
Lady at the back there.
There is. There you go.
Policeman.
Yes?
Sorry. I was talking to one of the policemen who come from Northumbria, I may add. And he said that he'd never been anywhere as pretty as the Maltings were. And it was lovely to be there on the early shift on a morning to see all the ducks, and he's seen the otter as well. And he said it was fantastic. And what he really liked people to do was to go and buy more bread in Tesco's, because he enjoyed watching them feeding the ducks.
Positive way forward, though, to see in the centre of a city an otter. Amazing. Right, everybody, I hope you found it informative. We said we'd come back, and I think it's been worthwhile giving you all the information. And thank you very much for DEFRA. Thank you to the police and to the recovery group. I do want to say a big thank you to DEFRA, because and wish them well and hope that the recovery goes as smoothly as we hope it does. But believe me, I've not been used to working as closely with government, but I do think as soon as we've had these sites away from investigation, I think they've done a grand job in actually getting going and getting a plan. And I feel really confident that they're going to work in the city and deliver us a safe city at the end of it. So thank you very much for all you've done. Thank you. Don't forget to keep updated on the website, and this will be, this meeting, if your friends haven't seen it, then it will be webcast. I don't know when we need to come back again. I think if you can tell us if you think you want another meeting, then please come back to us. In the meantime, we just get on with the job and come back when we think that there's more to tell you. Is that all right? Are you happy with that? Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.